Hi, I'm Leslie and welcome to what I like to call Crochet for Icons. And if you're here right now, you're an icon, duh. Okay, so on today's agenda, we're going to be working on some heart charms and we're also going to be working on some heart pouches. So if you're just as excited as I am, let's get started. You're going to need weight for acrylic yarn in 2 different colors. You'll need a bigger hook and a smaller hook. For my bigger hook, I'm using 4mm and my smaller one, I'm using 3.75mm. You can choose different sizes depending on how big or small you want your heart to be. You'll need a yarn needle like this one because we're going to be doing some sewing. Any pair of scissors that you have laying around. Then you'll need some yarn scraps, or you could use stuffing, or you could also just use the yarn that you're using for your heart. For mine, I'm just going to use the same light pink yarn. Then you'll need some ribbon. I like to match mine to my main color, so I'm going to be matching this pink here. You can use whatever size and color ribbon that you'd like. Lastly, you'll need a hot glue gun to go on the bow, but you can also choose to sew it on if you prefer. We're going to start with our main color, the color that you want to use for this part here, as well as this part here. I'm going to be using the light pink for my main color, and you're going to use your bigger hook. For me, that's 4mm. We're starting with the magic circle, so I'll quickly show you how to do it. You're going to pinch the end of the yarn between your pinky and your thumb. Then you're going to wrap around your top 3 fingers. You're going to create an X, bring it around, and then pinch it again. So the front looks like an X, the back looks like a pair of parallel lines. You're going to go under the second line, hook the first line, twist, and bring up a loop. I then just hold right below where I just pulled my loop up, and I readjust how I'm holding my magic circle. So this is what it should look like. And then you're just going to chain 1, and then you're going to tighten that, and then flip the circle over so that the tail is on the left side. We're going to chain 3 to start the first row of our heart. Go ahead and leave the pattern here for you to crochet along with. If you're not a beginner, I would recommend to watch this in 2x speed because I go through this pretty slow. I do 3 triple crochets into the center of the circle. Then we're going to do 3 double crochets into the center of the circle. Then we're going to chain 1, and then we're going to do 1 triple crochet into the center of the circle. Then chain 1 and do 3 double crochets into the center of the circle. Then we're doing 3 triple crochets into the center. Now we're going to chain 3. Go ahead and close up your circle, but don't close it all the way because we will be going into it for the second row. Then just slip stitch into the center of the circle, and that's going to complete row 1. For row 2, we're going to be doing 3 single crochets into this chain 3 space from the last row. we're going to do 2 half double crochets into this next stitch. Make 3 half double crochets into the next stitch. Do 2 half double crochets into the next stitch. Then do 1 single crochet into each of the next 3 stitches. Then we're going to do 1 single crochet into this chain 1 space from the last row. Then go ahead and chain 1 and do 1 double crochet above this triple crochet from the last row. Then chain 1 and do 1 single crochet into this chain 1 space on the other side. Then do 1 single crochet into each of the next 3 stitches. Do 2 half double crochets into the next stitch. Do 3 half double crochets into the next stitch. Do 2 half double crochets into the next stitch. Then do 3 single crochets into this chain 3 space from the last row. And slip stitch into the center of the circle, and that's going to complete row 2. For row 3, we're going to start by doing 1 single crochet into each of the next 3 stitches. Then do 2 single crochets into the next stitch. One single crochet into the next stitch. Do 2 single crochets into the next stitch. Then we're going to do 1 single crochet into each of the next 8 stitches. Then do 1 single crochet into this chain 1 space from the last row. single crochet above this double crochet from the last row, then do 1 single crochet into this chain 1 space, then we're going to do 1 single crochet into each of the next 8 stitches. Do 2 single crochets into the next stitch, one single crochet into the next stitch, then do 2 single crochets into the next stitch, then do 1 single crochet into each of the next 3 stitches, then we're going to slip stitch into this slip stitch from our last row. So we're going to go between our last stitch that we just did and our first stitch, that space in the middle, that's the slip stitch. So we're going to slip stitch into that space. After that third row, you're going to go ahead and chain 1, and then you can cut your yarn and fasten off by pulling the rest of the yarn through. Now you can fully close your circle tightly by pulling on that first end. For the ends, I like to tie them into a knot a couple of times. I usually do about 3 or 4 knots. If you're doing the keychain version, you can just cut these ends shorter and they're going to stay on the inside when we stuff the heart. For the pouch version, I'm going to show you personally how I like to weave in the ends. So take one of your ends and you're going to thread it through your yarn needle. And we're going to be going into these center stitches. You see how these stitches kind of form a circle in the center? We're going to go through those stitches. I like to thread it all the way to the other end of the circle, and then when you get to the end, you're going to skip 1 stitch and you're going to go to the next stitch and then weave under that as well. You don't have to do it this way, but this is just how I like to do it. And just cut your yarn and then we can work on the second end. For this end, I like to weave under the stitches of our second row. So I just follow the second row, weaving underneath every stitch. And then I like to make sure that I'm only going through these back loops and not the front. I don't weave under the whole second row, I kind of just do just like where the round part is. And after I've weaved in just for that small section, I like to cut my yarn, and that's pretty much it for that end. We're going to make one more heart with the same color using the same hook and the same pattern. I'll leave the pattern here again in case you don't want to go back. Or if you prefer to crochet along, you can go back to the first part and crochet along with that. It's the exact same pattern, so that also works. Now we're going to do our smaller heart, so go ahead and grab your second color, the color that you want to use for this inner part and the ruffles. We're going to again start with a magic circle, and it's going to be the exact same pattern as the other hearts. The only difference is that it's only going to be row 1 and row 2. Here's the pattern again in case you don't want to go back. Make sure to leave a long tail at the very end for sewing. If you prefer to crochet along, I'll be crocheting the entire smaller heart, so you can stick around if you'd like. So we start with our chain 3 and 3 triple crochets. Then we'll do 3 double crochets into the center of the circle. Then we chain 1, do 1 triple crochet, then we chain 1, then we do 3 double crochets into the center, Then we do 3 triple crochets into the circle. Then we chain 3. Then go ahead and close your circle by pulling that center string, but don't pull it all the way because we will be going into it again. Then slip stitch into that center. And we'll get started with row 2. Do 3 single crochets into this chain 3 space. Then do 2 half double crochets into the next stitch. Do 3 half double crochets into the next stitch. Do 2 half double crochets into the next stitch. Do 1 single crochet into each of the next 3 stitches. Then do 1 single crochet into the chain 1 space. Then we're going to chain 1 and do 1 double crochet above the triple crochet from the last row. Then we chain 1 and do 1 single crochet into the chain 1 space. Then do 1 single crochet into each of the next 3 stitches. Do 2 half double crochets into the next stitch. Then do 3 half double crochets into the next stitch. Do 2 half double crochets into the next stitch. Then do 3 single crochets into the chain 3 space. Then just slip stitch into the center of the circle. And that completes our smaller heart. Chain 1 and leave a long tail, and then you can just cut your yarn. Then just pull it through to fasten off. Then you can just pull that center end so that the circle will close completely. I then just tied both of my ends together into a couple knots just like the other heart. You can then just thread the smaller end through your needle and weave it in just like we did before with the other heart. You should have 2 bigger hearts and 1 smaller heart, and we're going to take one of our bigger hearts and our smaller heart and we're going to sew them together. So go ahead and thread the end of your smaller heart through your yarn needle. So you're going to take your smaller heart and you're going to put it in the center of the bigger heart. We're going to be sewing over these top loops of the smaller heart and also the top loop of the second row of our bigger heart. So the holes that you want to go through are these right here. Poke your needle through that last stitch that we did from row 2, that's right here, and pull your yarn all the way through until the hearts are together. Then we're going to go through the back of this slip stitch that we did from our last row. So go through the back of the slip stitch, and also go to the back of the slip stitch of the white heart that we did at the end of the row. Then you're going to poke your needle through that first stitch from the smaller heart and the first stitch of the second row of the back heart. These are the holes that I was mentioning earlier. So pull your yarn through both of the front and the back heart. We're going to keep going into these holes here that I mentioned earlier and also the top loops of the smaller heart. So we're going to go through the back of that next stitch and the back of the smaller heart, And we're going to keep doing this, poking through the front and then poking through the back of both. And just work your way around the whole entire heart. You just want to make sure that you're sewing the corresponding stitches together, so the first stitch of the smaller heart goes with the first stitch of the bigger heart, the second stitch goes with the second stitch, and the third stitch with the third stitch, and then so on and so forth. This is just to make sure that the hearts align perfectly. For this bottom section, you go through that chain 1 space in the front and the chain 1 space in the back heart. And then again, go through the chain 1 space from the front and the back hearts. So continue until you reach the end. When you've reached the other end of your heart, just finish off that last stitch going through the front and back hearts. Then we're going to be making a knot, so put your needle underneath one of these stitches and pull it through and create a knot. If you're doing the charm keychain version, you can cut this end shorter and we'll leave it on the inside when we stuff the heart. With the pouch version, we're going to weave our ends in. So poke your needle through some of these stitches and you can weave it in. Another option, if you really don't want to weave your ends, you can poke your needle through to this front side of the bigger heart, but behind the smaller heart. So in between them, you could just pull it through and you can cut that off. You can choose whichever option works best for you. If you're doing this version, you can stick around, but if you're doing the pouch version, you're going to skip to this timestamp. Grab the color that you want to use for your ruffles and your smaller hook. For me, that's 3.75 millimeters. We're going to start with a slip knot. It's the same as a magic circle. The only difference is you're going to pull that first line all the way through, and then you're just going to tighten it, and that's your slip knot. You then just put it on your hook and tighten it, and that's it. We're going to take our two hearts and we're going to put them back to back. We're going to go into the top loop only of that first stitch of our front heart. So go ahead and put your hook through the top loop of that first stitch, and then you're going to put your hook through the top loop only of the last stitch of the back heart. Not the slip stitch, but this stitch here. So go ahead and insert your hook into that top loop only. So once you have your hook inserted into the top loop only of both the front and the back hearts, we're going to be doing one slip stitch, but you want to make sure that you're working around this end so that later we don't have to weave it in. So go ahead and do your one slip stitch. And then I just like to tighten mine. Then we're going to chain 3 to start our first ruffle. Slip stitch into the next stitch of both the front and the back heart, but only go into the top loops. So go into the top loop of the front heart and also the top loop of the back heart. And then you're going to do one slip stitch and make sure you're working around the end. And this will complete our first ruffle, so we're going to keep doing this to make the rest of the ruffles. So for the next one, we're going to chain 3. And then go into the top loop of the front heart and the top loop of the back heart, and then do one slip stitch. For the next ruffle, again, we're going to chain 3 and we're going to slip stitch around the top loops of both the front and the back hearts for this next stitch. So we're going to continue doing chain 3 and slip stitch until we get to about here, and then at that point we're going to start stuffing our heart. So continue working until you get to about that point. So now that you've gotten to this point, your heart should look like this, and you should have a little bit of space to start stuffing the heart. I'm just going to be using the same light pink yarn that I used to make my hearts. I like to use the same colored yarn because it's harder to see through the stitches. I like to cut my yarn into little bunches, and then I'll start stuffing the heart little by little. You can stuff it as much or as little as you'd like. I finished stuffing my heart, so now we're going to continue doing our ruffles for the rest of the way. You can always continue stuffing as you finish the ruffles as well. So I'm just continuing doing chain 3 and then slip stitch into the top loop of the front and the back stitch. So we're going to continue doing that for these last few stitches, and when you get to the very end, we're going to finish off our last ruffle. After the last ruffle, we're going to be doing one slip stitch into the slip stitch space at the very end. So right here, that's where you're going to slip stitch into. And I'm slip stitching into just the front heart. Now we're going to chain 50 to create our loop. You can choose to do more loops or less loops, it just has to be enough for the heart to fit through. Then we're just going to slip stitch into that first top loop of the front and the back heart, the same space that we slip stitched in the very beginning of our ruffles. And this is going to complete our charm keychain, so you can just go ahead and chain 1. You can cut your yarn and fasten off, and I'll show you how we're going to weave in the ends. So go ahead and thread your end through your needle. The other end we crocheted around, so that one should be all done. You're going to poke your needle into the top of one of these stitches. You're going to poke it all the way through to the bottom stitches. So you see how my needle is poking up right there. You're just going to push it all the way through. And then I like to poke my needle through the back of the ruffle stitches. So poke through there, and then you're going to pull the yarn all the way through. And then insert your needle into the next stitch. And then you're going to poke it through again to the top stitches. And you're going to pull it all the way through, but don't do this part too tightly because we don't want to mess up the shape of the heart. Then you can just cut off the excess yarn. We're done with the crochet part, so now you can skip over to the bow section. For our pouch ruffles, we're going to be using our smaller hook. For me, that's 3.75 millimeters. So go ahead and grab your ruffle color, and we're going to start with the slip knot. It's the same as our magic circle. The only difference is we're pulling that first loop and then pulling it all the way through, and that's it for the slip knot. We're starting with our front heart, so we're going to do one slip stitch into the 5th stitch. So we count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Go ahead and slip stitch into the top loop only. To start our first ruffle, we're going to chain 3. Then we're going to slip stitch into the top loop only of the next stitch. I also like to make sure that when I'm working on the ruffles that I crochet around this end so that we don't have to weave it in later. So go ahead and do your slip stitch, and then we're going to continue doing the same thing for the next ruffle. So we're going to chain 3 and slip stitch into the top loop only of the next stitch and around that end. Then we're going to do another ruffle, so go ahead and chain 3 and do your slip stitch. We're going to do one more ruffle, so do another chain 3 and a slip stitch. So you should have 4 ruffles at this point. It should look like this. For this next part, we're going to be doing one slip stitch into the slip stitch space. Then we're going to chain 7. And then we're going to slip stitch into the top loop only of that first stitch from the beginning of our heart. Then we continue our ruffles, so chain 3 and do a slip stitch on the top loop only of that next stitch. Continue this for 3 more ruffles, so you should have in total 4 ruffles on this side of the heart. Okay, at this point you should have 4 ruffles on this left side of the heart. We have 1, 2, 3, and 4. For this next part, we're going to chain 3. And we're going to slip stitch into the top loop only of the next stitch, but we're also going to be going into the top loop of our back heart as well. So go into that top loop of the next stitch for the front heart, and then for the back heart, it's going to be the 6th stitch. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, the top loop of that 6th stitch. After you insert your hook into both of those, you can go ahead and slip stitch. It should look like this from the front and from the back. And for the next ruffle, we're going to be doing the same thing, and we're going to be going into both the front and the back heart when we slip stitch. So the top loop of the front and the top loop of the back. So we're going to continue doing chain 3 and then slip stitching into the top loop only of both the front and the back heart. So continue working on the ruffles going through both the front and the back hearts, and go up until we reach the other side where we started our ruffles, and then I'll show you what to do next. Once you've finished your last ruffle, you're going to chain 3, and then we're going to be slip stitching into that first stitch that we went into. Go into the top loop only, and then slip stitch into that first chain of the chain 3 that we made in the very beginning. So the first chain of that first ruffle. Then we're going to turn our heart over so that we can work on the back. So we're going to go into that first stitch in the back, so this stitch here, go into the top loop only and do 1 slip stitch. Then we're going to continue doing our ruffle, so chain 3, and then you're going to slip stitch into the top loop only of that next stitch. Again, for the next ruffle, chain 3 and slip stitch into the top loop only. We're going to do 1 more ruffle, so chain 3 and slip stitch into the top loop only. So you should have 3 ruffles for this back part. Then we're going to chain 1, and we're going to do 1 single crochet into the top loop only of the next stitch. Next we're going to chain 50 to create our loop. You can do more or less chains, you just need to make sure that the loop is big enough to fit our heart through. After the 50 chains, we're going to slip stitch into that slip stitch space. So insert your hook into that slip stitch from the bigger heart and do your slip stitch. Then you're going to single crochet into the top loop only of that next stitch. Now we're going to chain 1 and then slip stitch into the top loop only of the next stitch. Now we're going to continue our ruffles, so go ahead and chain 3 and then slip stitch into the top loop only of the next stitch. Then continue the chain 3 and slip stitch for 2 more ruffles. So the back should look like this so far. Then we're going to slip stitch into these back loops of this ruffle. I'm going into the last ruffle before we started going through both the front and the back hearts. So I'm putting my hook through both of those loops and then I'm just going to slip stitch. Then you just chain 1 and cut your yarn and fasten off. To weave in this final end, I like to thread it through my needle and then I'll go through these back loops of our ruffles. And I'll do a couple of ruffles and then I'll just cut off the excess. And that concludes the crochet part of our ruffle heart pouch. We're going to work on the ribbon bow part next, so go ahead and grab some ribbon and I'll show you how we're going to do the bow. For the bow, you're going to grab your ribbon and you're going to make some bunny ears and you're going to cross them and you're going to push one ear through the bottom loop. And then I flipped it over a little bit, pull it together, and that's your bow. Then just readjust it how you like. To attach the bow, I like to use a hot glue gun, and what I do is I put glue into this center right there and then I put the bow right over it. You can also sew it on if that works better for you. I just choose to do hot glue because it's a lot faster. And we're all done. Now let me show you how to hang on your heart pouch or your heart charm. I just put a couple things into my pouch and I'm going to close it up. Just put that bigger loop into the smaller loop and pull it through. Then take the bigger loop and put it under where you want to hang it. Then you feed your heart through the bigger loop, and once it's all the way through, you're just going to pull it tightly. And that's it, you're all done, but I'll also show you again with the heart charm. If you have any questions or if you're confused on anything, let me know in the comments and I'll try my best to help. I'll leave all my social media down below in case you're interested in keeping up with me in my future crochet projects. Thank you for stopping by and I hope this was helpful. I'll see you next time. Bye! Oh, and if no one told you today, you're iconic, duh.